This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of America at War.
I'm Harry Smith at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. Good day. The White House is calling it an historic moment. U.S. troops in the middle of Baghdad, and we are now awaiting a Pentagon briefing on today's dramatic developments. Here's the latest. U.S. Marines today toppled a statue of Saddam Hussein right in the heart of Baghdad. A crowd of Iraqis immediately attacked the wreckage. And as for Saddam himself, his whereabouts and fate are still unknown. The symbolic decapitation followed a sweep of U.S. forces into the heart of the Iraqi capital. Despite the advance, Allied commanders warn more fighting may lie ahead. Looting is widespread in Baghdad, where a U.S. commander says there is no government left to speak of. In a reminder that the fighting for Baghdad is not completely over, U.S. troops exchanged fire with suspected Saddam Fedayeen earlier in the day, and a large fire burned for much of the day at the Ministry of Finance. CBS News correspondents are standing by at all key locations. We want to start with National Security Correspondent David Martin, who is at the Pentagon. Let's redraw the picture, if you will, David. It was about 8:45 Eastern Time when we saw those Marines roll right into the heart of Baghdad, and at that point, nary a shot fired.
And of course, that's followed very shortly by the symbolic act of pulling down Saddam Hussein's statue. And that seems to be an accurate depiction of what has happened in Baghdad itself. The commanding general of the 3rd Infantry Division, which is the division that led the charge from Kuwait to Baghdad, is now quoted as saying that the U.S. military is in control of central Baghdad, has been in all the government buildings, and found no one home. And he also predicts that combat operations in and around Baghdad and in southern Iraq will be completed in a matter of days. However, the overall commander of this war, General Tommy Franks, in his daily video conference with senior officials back here in Washington, warned that there was still fighting to come up north, which of course is where Saddam's hometown of Tikrit is, and where other cities that the U.S. and coalition forces have not yet wrested control of from the Iraqi regime are still located. So there is fighting to go on, but most importantly, I think there are some search operations that are going on. First and foremost is the search for Saddam Hussein. They will never admit that they are looking for just one man, but of course getting him, or at least determining his fate, is crucial. I've got no new information, and I don't think the U.S. intelligence community has any new information on where he is. I can shoot down the rumor that he had taken refuge in the Russian embassy in Baghdad. The second search is for the evidence of weapons of mass destruction. After all, this is what this operation is all about. We are doing this because the U.S. had convincing intelligence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. There has yet been no confirmed findings of any weapons of mass destruction, and there were some quite extravagant claims made. 10,000 liters of anthrax. It's necessary to find those 10,000 liters or something very close to that. And then, of course, there is the search for the American POWs and MIAs. There are 7 POWs, and there are 10 soldiers listed as missing in action. And we know that the Marines went to that military prison at the airfield on the southeast corner of Baghdad and found uniforms with the names of some of the soldiers who were in that supply convoy that Jessica Lynch was part of, that was ambushed so early in the war. So there is a lot yet still to happen here, Harry.
Let's talk about this militarily for a while. It's so significant to have these U.S. forces in Baghdad as we speak. There have been some firefights, even significant fighting on the northeast part of town, but there is so much of this war yet to be fought, especially up around Kirkuk in Mosul, the oil fields up in Kirkuk. Isn't it suspected that those oil fields may already be set up to be sabotaged?
The belief is that they are already wired for demolition. Everybody talks about the tipping point when the Iraqi people finally decide that it is safe to switch sides here, abandon Saddam Hussein, and come over to the American or coalition side. And that seems to be happening, at least in the neighborhoods we can see on television in Baghdad. But up north, which is sort of Saddam's home territory where his clan is based, it remains very much to be seen whether those people are going to come over to the American side. There may simply be a given number of people who are simply going to fight to the bitter end. We do not know where all those 15 to 20,000 members of the Special Republican Guard are. They seem to have melted away along with the regime leaders. They're out there somewhere, and they're going to have to be dealt with.
So many people have so much at stake in this regime, and it has been clear since this war started 3 weeks ago that plenty of them have been willing to fight to the death to hang on to what they've been a part of for more than 20 years now.
And in a way, you have to respect the courage of some of these fighters. I mean, you're talking about young men with no military equipment other than automatic rifles and rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and they're taking on tanks coming down the street at them. And it's a battle they must know they can't win, but presumably their hatred of the United States or their stake in the regime is so great that they have to take these just incredibly desperate measures.
All right, David Martin at the Pentagon. We will be checking back in with you a little bit later on. We want to go to John Roberts now, who has been with the Marines right on the outskirts of Baghdad, a little bit farther into the city, and now back at a safer position now. We've got a night scope on him now. And John, what can you tell us about what your day was like?
Well, Harry, there seems to still be a lot of resistance in the eastern sections of Baghdad. Not necessarily heavy resistance, not necessarily organized resistance, but it's a lot of these imported fighters, the militia members, the Fedayeen that David Martin was talking about. Most of the resistance that they're meeting is in the form of machine gun attacks or rocket-propelled grenade attacks. They step out from behind a building, they try to take a lucky shot and see if they can hit something. They try to pin down the Marines, they try to harass them with fire, they try to mix it up for them, make their lives difficult. These are people that the Marines are particularly worried about because they say, as David Martin pointed out, the Special Republican Guard members, some of the Republican Guard members, and the regular military seems to have just sort of melded into the background, evaporated, as one Marine commander told me. But he said that these particular people, these militia members, the Fedayeen, the jihadists, have no loyalty to anyone in particular, probably not even Saddam Hussein. They're here simply to try to kill Americans. So routing them from the suburbs of Baghdad is going to be very difficult. And of course, the suburbs, this house-to-house area that they've engaged the Marines in, is an area where they thrive. You know, they can't be out in the open desert and try to face an invading Marine or Army force. They've got to bring them into the city and do it that way. So the Marines are saying, while you're looking at all of the pictures of what's happening in downtown Baghdad, you're seeing the statue of Saddam Hussein come down, you're seeing people cheering in the streets. Don't be fooled by that, because this battle is not over yet. It still could take a couple to 3 more days before they finally suppress all of that resistance there. There's another concern, though, going forward as well, and that is that this war is unlike anything that we've ever seen before in terms of the swiftness of it, in terms of hopscotching and bypassing a lot of centers or moving through them quickly and then leaving sort of the jelly to fill in behind after they've gone through. But as they do that, that creates a vacuum of power in some of these smaller towns like Khalat Sakar to the south, Numania to the southeast of here. And the problems in some of those cities goes like this. the Marines worked together with the local elders, local village elders, to try to find out where the Ba'ath Party members were, those people who were loyal to Saddam, where the arms caches were, try to get rid of the machine guns, the mortars, the rocket-propelled grenades, so that they could make the city safe, and as a matter of secondary effect, make the Marines safe from the rear, that they wouldn't be counterattacked. Well, they've gone through there, they've talked with these village elders, they've uncovered these weapons caches, they've got rid of the Ba'ath Party members, and then as they leave and then that jelly folds in behind them, the Baathists move back in and they again try to take over the village. In one small village outside of Khalat Sakar, exactly that happened about 10 days ago. They got the weapons, they got the Ba'ath Party, everybody left, everyone was happy in the village, and then what happens? The Marines left, they jumped up to the next town, the Ba'ath Party came back in, and they assassinated the very village elder who had helped out the Marines. In a town just to the southeast of here, Azazia, a local councilman by the name of Malik Kreif wrote a letter to U.S. military leaders saying, please don't leave us behind. Please provide security, because we're afraid that these bad guys will come back into the city and then the nightmare will start all over again. In cities like Qasr and in Basra, there is a plan to provide security. But in many of these small towns and villages, there aren't. So, Harry, there could be a potential situation here that Baghdad will fall, the regime will crumble, the U.S. military will be essentially in control of the country, yet may have to go back and refight some of the battles that it's already won.
John Roberts on the outskirts of Baghdad this evening. Thanks very much. We want to check in with Dan Rather now, who went back in country several days ago over the weekend, has been in and out of Iraq, and right up close to the action. He's back in Kuwait City now. And Dan, this has been one extraordinary day to witness what we have witnessed there in the heart of downtown Baghdad over the last 3 hours or so. The Marines rolling right in and lassoing that statue and seeing it pulled down. It was quite. It's been quite an amazing day. Very interested in your reflections on your thoughts right now.
Well, first of all, Harry, there's no question that this is a great day for American military power, a great day for the American people, in that while certainly there are people who oppose the war and still have deep concerns about it, that once the nation got committed to war, the question was whether we had the firepower, the willpower, and the staying power to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. And while certainly one has to hold out the prospect, as unbecoming as it may be, to say that there's probably some blood still ahead, still some fighting ahead, what happens in Tikrit, what happens in Mosul. But for the moment, the concentration on Baghdad, but I keep reminding myself, Harry, that this strike, this lightning strike, this deep maneuver by the U.S. military, it has proved that America has the power and the will to effect a change in a distant land. And that has far-reaching ramifications, the likes of which we can't quite figure out yet. There's no question it's a great day. It's, by the way, among other things, that it gives justification to the General Tommy Franks, who's been criticized by an awful lot of people along the way, that his war plan, his battle plan, is to bypass a lot of southern Iraq cities and go straight to the heart of the Saddam Hussein regime with speed and flexibility. What we're seeing today demonstrates the planning and the wisdom of that. The same could be said of Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, and for that matter, the Commander-in-Chief, President Bush. I know there'll be people who sigh and say, well, it isn't over yet. And indeed, it isn't over yet. But one must give credit where credit is due. President Bush, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, the Army commander on scene, the commander here in the region, General Tommy Franks. When you see these pictures, this resulted from a combination of firepower, willpower, planning. There's a whole U.S. military, a whole new U.S. military that affected what you're seeing today on the screen. It's the military of the digital age and the information age, which isn't to say that this can be effective and successful everywhere, anywhere in the world. But what you're seeing today is proof positive that for at least the time being, it's been very successful here.
Dan, we've got some pictures now that were shot earlier today of the Marines literally putting a chain around the neck of the statue of Saddam Hussein. They dragged out the old Iraqi flag, the pre-Saddam Hussein Iraqi flag, and it was a U.S. tank fixer with a chain around the neck that pulled away, and the statue slowly fell. It was bent, it was bowed, and eventually it was broken off of the pedestal. It was an amazing scene. You were just in Baghdad weeks ago and talked at length with Saddam Hussein, who vowed not to be broken by this conflict. Your thoughts on if in fact he's still alive, what must be going through his mind, what's going through his psyche right now?
Well, of course, Harry, no one knows whether Saddam Hussein is still alive. No one knows if he is alive, if he's wounded, or how badly he's wounded. The hard fact is we simply don't know what has happened to Saddam Hussein. And another hard fact is that until and unless it's determined what has happened to Saddam Hussein, that he's dead, he's badly wounded, it's going to be very hard to declare the ultimate triumph and victory in Iraq in the eyes of many people, particularly in what we call the Arab world, which is an overgeneralization, but for these purposes, the Arab world, and for that matter, throughout Islam. But it's still early on. I repeat for emphasis, nobody simply knows what's happened to Saddam Hussein. There are all kinds of theories, and besides those that he's dead or he's badly wounded, some theories are that he has made his way to Syria, perhaps wounded. But this kind of speculation doesn't help us very much. We always come back to that rock-hard fact that nobody knows what's happened to Saddam Hussein. But in many important ways, Harry, there's no question that the Battle of Baghdad is the decisive pivot point in this campaign, while always, again, emphasizing it's a redundancy, but I think it's worth taking time to remind ourselves there can be a lot of tough fighting still ahead. And as was mentioned earlier in the program, that could very well take the form of the United States military having to loop back into some portions of southern Iraq and refight some of the battles that were sort of scattered and in pockets on the way up, because that could be in the nature of guerrilla war. Of course, General Tommy Franks and his planners will already have an eye on that and have some ideas once they bring the 4th Infantry Division up to reinforce, if you will, in the southern part of the country. But this is simply to say that there still could be a guerrilla war ahead. But these scenes today are something to be savored for all who worked so hard to make it happen.
It was a stunning situation. We were on the air earlier today, Dan, live in New York. It was about 8:45, and suddenly we had pictures of just this column of M1A1 tanks. We're literally looking down the barrel of the tanks as they rolled right into this very familiar square, this traffic circle where this huge statue of Saddam is. And in the entire time that we had the picture up, I think talking about over 3.5 hours, I think we heard 3 single shots fired there in that area. Not so far away over at the oil ministry, these are all places you well know. Byron Pitts was with the Marines and well pinned down for some time there by fire. And I think one of the things that can't be emphasized enough is just how volatile and how potentially dangerous the situation for U.S. forces that are in Baghdad will continue to be, especially in these night hours to come. Dan Rather is with us in Kuwait. He was with some of the Army Special Forces in the last day or so. And we've been talking a little bit about just the tenacity and the planning and the power that's gone into this amazing blitz across the Iraqi countryside and the taking of downtown Baghdad today. We're looking at pictures now, Dan, of Iraqis who found a sledgehammer, and they were literally one by one taking their shots at the pedestal of the statue, and each one sort of getting a lick in, as it were. But it's still worth emphasizing, it seems to me, that he has had so much control over the people of this country. And would you not agree that there are still people who are very wary of what the future might hold there?
Well, on a day like today, Harry, the pictures speak so strongly for themselves, and it's a time to sort of stand back, sit back, look at what's happening and try to think it through against a backdrop, in a context that reminds us that Iraq is an extremely complicated country in its mixture, its ethnic mixture with the Kurds in the north, the Sunnis in mostly the upper central part of the country, the Shiites predominating in the southern part of the country. No one can know, of course, but one would, by any reasonable analysis, have to think that many, if not most, of these people celebrating in Baghdad are Shias. Baghdad has between 5 and 6 million population. The Shiite population has been variously estimated at anything from 40 to over 50%. And of course, Saddam Hussein being a Sunni Muslim, the Shiites, who are a majority in the country, certainly a plurality in the country, always seized under the fact that Saddam Hussein, among other things, punished them so severely, so viciously and fiercely in the wake of the first Gulf War, Gulf War I, when the United States has acknowledged that it basically abandoned the Shiites who had been encouraged to revolt against Saddam Hussein and his Sunni regime. So all of that is in the background. It's a very textured context against which we're seeing these scenes of jubilation today. But this much we do know, that those who analyzed the situation in Iraq and said there's an enormous pent-up rage against what Saddam Hussein has done to the country and done to a lot of people in the country, they've been vindicated in that analysis today, because unquestionably, finally, the volcano of concern from below, it was sort of waiting to see whether the Americans were indeed, the American-led force was indeed going to topple the Saddam Hussein regime. Whatever has happened to Saddam Hussein, his regime is finished, as President Bush promised that it would be. And so this explosion from below is all coming to the surface now in Baghdad. As I say, there may be tough days ahead and other fighting, particularly up north. But on this day, you see what we were looking for on the first days of the campaign. Mark Phillips and I were talking the other night saying, well, you know, in Basra, they thought there was going to be an almost immediate sense of liberation and people pouring into the streets. That didn't happen. They waited for a while to see what was going to be the effect of the American-led force in the country. And it turns out that was very much the case in Baghdad as well, that for a long time people just stayed in their houses. They watched, they looked, they listened, they kept the children sort of out of sight, waiting to see what was happening. But once they realized that the U.S. Army coming from the south and went west primarily, and the Marines coming from the south and east and even from the north, were connecting. And once the police and the military disappeared from the streets of Baghdad, then the rumble from below exploded forth in what we're seeing here now. I would say, Harry, that there is a question in my mind that the police and the soldiers disappeared. Where did they disappear is an open question at the time being, and one we might ponder.
Indeed, and if they've disappeared and run like rats from a sinking ship, or if they've disappeared to regroup and fight again. We'll talk about that some more in a bit. Dan Rather is with us live in Kuwait City. We want you to stand by right there, Dan. We've got lots more to talk about, but we want to revisit a situation that happened, that really started just over 4 hours ago as U.S. Marines and coalition forces rolled right into downtown Baghdad. It was quite an extraordinary scene, right into the middle of the city, surrounded a statue of Saddam Hussein, but not so far away from what was a peaceful situation was the oil ministry, where other Marines were pinned down, and our Byron Pitts, CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts, was on the scene, and this is what it was like just a little over an hour ago.
Okay, you can hear that. That's incoming fire. A flare just went up. That's an indication that the Marines have spotted where this fire is coming from and assigned some Marines here where they may aim. This is the most intense fire that we've heard during this battle. Mark, get down, please, brother. This is my colleague, Mark Gulaganga, who's up taking pictures as this fight goes on. It's just about sunset here. That loud explosion, what do we think that was, sir? Those Marines firing back.
It was Byron Pitts a little bit earlier today in Baghdad as we saw those U.S. tanks rolling into Baghdad. It was not all easy. Stephen Black is a former UN weapons inspector and a CBS News consultant. He is with us in Washington. Stephen, you've spent so much time over in Iraq and in Baghdad. Your reflections on what you've been watching thus far today.
Well, Harry, it's just an amazing thing to see that statue of Saddam toppled over like that. I used to stay in the hotel there across the street from the Palestine and, you know, wake up every morning and see that statue, and now to see tanks there and the Iraqi people beating on the statue, it's a phenomenal thing to see.
Yeah, it was amazing. At one point, people were taking off their shoes, and if you're looking for a symbol of disrespect in that part of the world, to take off your shoes and to wail away on something, as some of those folks were doing, there is no higher insult than what those folks were doing earlier this afternoon. Of course, the question remains, Stephen, you know, you were over there looking for weapons of mass destruction in your time as a weapons inspector. We've had all of these signs and symbols and places where Iraqis have said, look over here, look over there, look at these giant drums filled with who knows what. Thus far, no positive signs of WMD. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that this is something that the regime had been hiding for years from the UN inspectors who are roaming all over the country, you know, day in and day out. So it's going to take some time to actually put our hands on it. The citizens pointing the way to the weapon stocks, that's going to be the solution. But you have to remember, of course, that not everybody in Iraq knows where the weapons are hidden. So a lot of these locals are just going to point the way towards suspect sites or places where they noticed funny things going on. And they'll each, in turn, have to be checked and investigated as possible weapons hide sites.
Talk a little bit about the Iraqi people. To spend that much time in Baghdad, you get the opportunity to meet folks. Some are reluctant to talk. Many won't talk at all. But this is a fragile fabric there with these folks who are really, you know, have been under this boot so long. It's very difficult for them to come out and embrace whatever is happening next.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing here is just how fragile a repressive structure based on fear can be. Once that level of repressive fear and concern for, your personal safety starts to lift, you start to have people out in the streets taking these, rather obvious actions against Saddam's regime, even against the memory of it. And right now there may be only hundreds or maybe a short 1,000 people in the streets, but there are probably 10 times that many that are sitting at home hearing the rumors about what's going on, basically being happy, but not yet willing to go out in the streets.
Because we should emphasize that Iraqi television and radio has been off the air for more than a day now. So it's not as if people in Baghdad proper, in a city of 5 million people, are watching this or even listening to it on the radio. They really don't know what's going on. And in these neighborhoods, the people who are tied into the Ba'athist regime, who are tied into Saddam Hussein's power, as they go home, the people who are celebrating there, they may be going home to a neighborhood where they literally don't know if their neighbor is with the liberation or still hanging on to the power from the regime and is a danger to them.
Yeah, people are going to be making some pretty complicated decisions for themselves about whether they want to be obviously involved in this uprising, or if they want to take these kinds of actions where they're on camera. But the movement in the streets here, the rumors about it will spread far and wide very quickly.
Stephen Black, thank you so much. You're watching continuing CBS coverage of America at War. Welcome back to CBS News World headquarters in New York, 1 o'clock Eastern Time. It's now, let's see, about 4 hours since U.S. tanks rolled into downtown Baghdad. An amazing scene earlier today. Big M1A1 tanks. These American forces popped out of the top there. They're keeping their eyes open. They're looking for snipers. They had their binoculars out, as you could see. But honestly, in the time that these guys rolled into town, we heard 1, 2, maybe 3 shots over a period of 3 or 4 hours. It was an amazing morning, an amazing thing to witness. Earlier today, they took up their positions around a famous, fabled statue, giant statue of Saddam Hussein. It was really, literally smack dab in the middle of town. There they are on armored personnel carriers. Here's an M1A1 tank. And there's the statue. And after a while, civilians started to come out into the street. And I thought Mark Phillips down in Kuwait, who has spent so much time in Baghdad, said it best. He was talking about how what you're seeing is one thing and what you're not seeing is something else altogether. There was a small crowd of several dozen to begin with who came out. They were waving their shirts and shouting some slogans and whatnot. There's a very muted celebration here in the center of Baghdad. The dozen turned into, several scores of people. They eventually put a rope noose around the neck of the statue. One of the locals there brought out a sledgehammer, and people literally, through the morning hours, took turns slashing away at this statue of Saddam Hussein. And then the U.S. forces brought in what is essentially a tank tow truck. It's a tank fixer. And a Marine put up an American flag. It was only up there for, maybe 60 seconds or so, 2 minutes at the most. The U.S. forces have gotten in some trouble with the locals for brandishing the flag. But then an Iraqi held the flag. That might be one of the pictures of the day. Eventually, the folks from this tank fixer dragged out this huge chain, this iron chain, wrapped it around the neck of the statue. That's an old Iraqi flag, a flag that Saddam Hussein did away with 15 years ago or so. And then the old Iraqi flag is put around the neck of the statue of Saddam Hussein, and then the tug of war came in earnest. The statue was no match for the Marine horsepower there, and as you watch the bronze figure fall over and eventually look at the crowd just engulf the statue, and it didn't take much of a tug or two after that for the statue to fall altogether. They're throwing debris, they're throwing rocks. There it is, all the way to the ground. And then, as our Lara Logan, who is on the scene, reported, jubilation, people just screaming, down with Saddam, down with Saddam. And a real spontaneous celebration took place. And then another picture of the day. There is the head of Saddam with an Iraqi citizen sitting right there on his skull, being dragged down the street. Right down the street. Just an amazing scene. Senator Joe Biden is with us. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it's been an amazing morning, to say the least. Some of your thoughts as you've watched this scene unfold there in Baghdad today.
One of the reasons I voted to allow the President the authority to do this was I believed that not only he had weapons of mass destruction, but that the people of Iraq really were being victimized in the extreme. And I think this is proof, at least in Baghdad, and I think you'll see it around the country as it becomes clear the wicked witch is dead, that the Iraqi people desperately look for a new life. And now the next part comes into play, Harry, and I hope we're able to do as well on this next bit of diplomacy and nation building as what we were able to do in toppling Saddam Hussein. I know the job's not completely finished yet, but it seems there is an absolute inevitability, obvious to the whole world now.
Winning the peace is what seems to be the order of the day, at least in terms of the conversation of the day.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about what you think that's going to entail, because this could be very, very complicated.
Well, it will be complicated. We knew that going in, Harry. And it's going to require the United States be in charge and maintain the security of Iraq for some time to come in the near term. My hope is we can bring NATO in to work with us under the umbrella of the U.S. Being in control. And then we have the problem of not only securing the nation and stopping retribution killings, which would be instinctively follow here because of the long history of the division and the abuse of the Shia and the Kurds. We have to, in addition to that, get to on the business of rebuilding Iraq, the roads, the bridges, the television stations, the radio stations, as well as the transition to a new government. And in that score, on those issues, I hope we do it as well as we did the military side and internationalize it more. Have a coalition that is even larger, that in fact gives a legitimacy to whomever the transition government here is, like we did internationally under our leadership in Bonn, Germany, in setting up Mr. Karzai and the transitional government in Afghanistan. We were the main player, but the rest of the world, NATO, the UN, the EU, just everyone was involved in that. And I think that it needs legitimacy, this new government, because our purpose here is to provide for a transition government that results in a more democratic Iraq that is a peaceful and contributing neighbor in the neighborhood.
But thus far, the Bush administration doesn't seem terribly inclined to go along with the notion that you just outlined.
Well, I think that seems to be true, but Brent Scowcroft, for example, the former national security advisor under the first President Bush, speaking to the Nobel Committee on another matter today, laid out how important he thought internationalizing this was. The Secretary of State feels strongly about that. The military feels. Now, the more conservative elements of the administration, led by Mr. Cheney and Rumsfeld, apparently do not. But I hope the President will in fact understand the wisdom. Understand sounds presumptuous. Will see the wisdom of having a government that is legitimate from the beginning, and that is impossible to occur even within Iraq if it appears to be a hand-picked government by the United States. So the battle for the president's decision is not over yet. Senators Lugar and Hagel, leading Republicans, myself, a Democrat, a lot of us share the view that there's a need to internationalize this now without giving up one scintilla of control of the security apparatus.
Understood. Senator Joe Biden in Washington, thanks so much for being with us. And of course, this is almost a little bit of a premature conversation, considering the fact that there is a good portion of Iraq that is still not in coalition control. And up north in Erbil, up in the Kurdish-controlled zone up there, is our Alan Pizzi. And Alan, it's been quite a day, because as soon as it became evident, even up there, that U.S. forces had gotten a serious foothold and control in Baghdad, things really erupted up there, didn't they?
Harry, they literally erupted. The people here just hit the streets. They began firing guns in the air at random. It's a traditional Kurdish way of celebrating, so there was a lot of falling lead around here. Then they were out in their cars, buses, trucks, waving flags from the various political parties, waving the old long ago Kurdish flag from 1946, screaming and shouting and hurling curses at Saddam Hussein, curses that are unprintable. But the Kurds have every reason to curse Saddam. They were his biggest victims along with the Shiites, but the Kurds were the people who were gassed by Saddam Hussein in 1988. During the Operation Anfal in the late 80s, he came in here and his forces smashed over 4,000 Kurdish villages. I mean, smashed them to pulp. And then they displaced hundreds of thousands of Kurds, killed hundreds of thousands more. And the war up here is not yet over because the two key areas, Mosul and Kirkuk, the big oil-producing areas, lie just south of here. The Kurds consider that part of their homeland, and those areas are not secured. Indeed, Iraqi forces have been pulling back from the front lines that were here, pulling back towards Mosul and Kirkuk. We just don't know what's there. There were a lot of Iraqi armored divisions around them originally. Now this morning, the Kurdish political leader, the spokesman here for this political leader, said that the Kurds, along with U.S. Special Forces, had captured a key mountain overlooking the city of Mosul. And they said the way was open for them and they did not believe they faced any resistance. On a couple of other front lines as well, we've been talking to both Special Forces and Kurdish commanders. They all say they've had a quiet couple of days, and we ask them, well, why aren't you moving in? And they say, well, there's no point taking casualties if you don't have to. And I think the policy up here has been to harass and squeeze the Iraqi defenders of Mosul and Kirkuk, hoping that when things fall apart in Baghdad, so too they will fall apart in Mosul and Kirkuk. But if they don't, and the Americans and the Kurds have to go in against them, it's going to be not quite as easy perhaps as the run-up from the south was, because there's no armor up here. The 173rd Airborne came into an airport in Kurdish-controlled areas about a week or so ago, but they've only just begun bringing in a few Abrams tanks and some fighting vehicles. They are flying them in, so you can only bring in one at a time in a C-17. So there's not a lot of armor to go up against whatever is in Mosul and Kirkuk. What they're doing at the moment is pushing forward as the Iraqis pull back. Then the U.S. Special Forces are spotting targets, calling in airstrikes, and hoping that the Iraqis will be worn down and give up. But as I say, it's been a quiet couple of days. Just before we came on air, we heard the sound of a couple of planes going over, but no explosions. Normally when they hit Kirkuk, if they hit it big, we can feel the vibrations here, but so far pretty quiet. But there is still a war going on here. There's a war that has yet to be won, and bear in mind too that Mosul and Kirkuk are about as far from Tikrit as Tikrit is from Baghdad. Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's home, lies in the middle. Perhaps the forces from Mosul and Kirkuk could try to pull back towards Tikrit, although that would, of course, expose them to air power. We just don't know what's going on, but no one up here thinks that the war is actually over, much as the Kurds are out celebrating, Harry.
Right. Let's talk about Tikrit for a minute, because in this country, in Iraq, Saddam Hussein's power base is Sunni-based, it's Ba'athist-based, but it is so much tribally based from his hometown of Tikrit. And I've got to wonder, just speculating now, just if the power, that, as it seems to be falling out of Baghdad, doesn't end up back there, and what potential violence could be there could be fairly significant, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right, Harry, because Saddam Hussein was first and foremost a tribal leader. He ran this country as a tribal leader would. He was not an educated, worldly man. And the power lay in the hands of the Tikritis. The Tikriti clan were the biggest, and the sub-clans within that, it's all to do with your relatives and who you know. And all of the people around Tikrit owed whatever they had to Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, because they're all of the same blood, as it were. They're the ones who would feel that they're likely to have their throats cut, their heads cut off, be slaughtered in their beds in retribution. So they're the ones that could well fight the hardest, and any diehards, that's where they would fade back to. Now the interesting thing is, I've been to Tikrit, and basically the actual town of Tikrit, it's nothing. It's just another little town on a main highway. You go off a little bit to the side to where Saddam was actually born. There are some pretty striking edifices in the way of big palaces, parade grounds, that sort of thing. How much is in there in the way of defenses, command and control things, no one knows. But certainly there is a blood loyalty, a tribal loyalty, probably a great fear of retribution. And I think that could be a hard one to crack. And as I say, the forces that have retreated out of, if they've escaped Baghdad, any important forces pulling out of Mosul and Kirkuk could head that way. And of course, they could also blow up, as has been mentioned by David Martin, the oil fields in Mosul and Kirkuk. So this is an area fraught with danger, Harry.
And I think the other thing that's worth emphasizing is while the southern oil fields in Iraq, the majority of the oil is in the southern oil fields, a great portion, somewhere around 40 or more percent of the oil in Iraq is in those northern oil fields up around Kirkuk, not so far from where you are. Alan Pizzi up in northern Iraq. Thank you very much. We want to show you some pictures right now from Dearborn, Michigan. There are about 100,000 Iraqis who live around the Detroit area. And this is the celebration earlier today in Dearborn, where a good portion of them live. And one of the folks in Dearborn today said, a guy named Ali Al-Ghazali, he hails from southern Iraq, and he said, "Today is my birthday. But it is also a birthday for all Iraqis." These are pictures in the United States. These are pictures in Dearborn, Michigan. There are really a number of hundreds of thousands of people, actually, of Middle Eastern descent that live in that neck of the woods, but maybe 100,000 Iraqi expats all told around the Detroit area. And that is a picture from Dearborn earlier today. Kind of an amazing celebration. Amazing celebration. The war is not over yet by any stretch of the imagination, and the White House is keeping a close eye on events as they unfold. And our Bill Plant is standing by there, and we want to check in with him now. Bill, good afternoon.
Harry, good afternoon to you. The president, we are told, watched the effort of the Iraqis in that square in Baghdad to get the statue down. He saw part of that in the small study, which is just off the Oval Office. He apparently then went away. He had a meeting with another foreign leader here today. And when he came back, he saw that they had gotten the statue down, and we're told he said, well, they got it down. He was briefed from early this morning on the events as tanks rolled into Baghdad. He was meeting with his national security leaders, and the White House has struck a very cautious attitude. We were reminded early this morning that there are still American troops in harm's way, that the fight is not over, that there are pockets of resistance not only in Baghdad, but as you were just hearing from Alan Pizzi, in the north as well. But the vice president has been somewhat less cautious about taking credit for all of this. He, of course, spoke out early last summer on the need for war with Iraq. And today he was in New Orleans at the American Society of Newspaper Editors, and he called this one of the most extraordinary military campaigns ever conducted.
Since the war, our forces have conducted themselves with all of the skill and integrity that President Bush and the American people expected of them. They are in the field at this very hour. Operations continue all across Iraq, securing cities, protecting supply lines, delivering tons of humanitarian aid. In downtown Baghdad this morning, we're seeing evidence of the collapse of any central regime authority. The streets are full of people celebrating. While pockets of regime security forces may remain, they appear to be far less effective at putting up any resistance.
Cheney also said that every day the wisdom of the U.S. war plan becomes more and more apparent. And he also took a little shot at some of the criticism of the war, that particularly in the early weeks, or the first week, by a lot of retired generals. He said the critics were retired generals embedded in TV studios. Cheney also said that the reconstruction of the state of Iraq and the new government have to reside in the coalition, meaning the United States and Britain, that the UN is not suited to do that kind of work. So Cheney also mentioned that there would be a meeting coming up this weekend in Nasiriyah, a small town south of Baghdad, of various Iraqi opposition groups in an attempt to form the interim government, or the council at least, which will represent the Iraqis in the interim government, though the government itself, as the U.S. has made quite plain, will be under military control for the foreseeable future. Harry?
Yeah, it's interesting, Bill, because Chalabi is already in country. He's in Iraq. He's there with some several hundred Iraqis who say they're ready to fight. This is such a fluid situation now, with no real police force on the ground, no Iraqi military left to speak of that the U.S. would, at some points, at least several weeks ago, was counting on to be able to provide some sort of organization, some sort of structure. And as we've seen, as some of these U.S. forces have rolled through these various towns in Basra and up around Saddam City, is chaos in the streets because there's no one to keep order. There's looting going on. It's quite an incredible situation. Thanks very much, Bill. It's now about 4.5 hours since U.S. forces rolled right into the heart of downtown Baghdad and surrounded this statue of Saddam Hussein. There's just a couple of shots fired right there. There's been some pretty fierce fighting, though, along that roadway in other parts and up in the northeastern suburbs. But our Lara Logan was on the scene right there by the Palestine Hotel as U.S. forces rolled in and Iraqis began to realize that the days of the regime of Saddam Hussein were, in fact, just about over.
It is quite unbelievable to see a U.S. Marine holding an Iraqi flag. He's attaching it to a thick metal chain that is around the neck of the statue of Saddam Hussein. You can see Saddam Hussein's arms stretching out towards the heavens here. The statue is just next to a mosque. So you have all the symbols of this regime and the country and the feelings of the people all around us. People are starting to chant. The Marines are coming down here now. It seems that they're going to dismantle the statue, really rip it out of its foundations, because it's an extraordinarily large structure, and it's going to take the full force of this tank to bring it down. But, you know, these symbols of the regime are very much a symbol of how Saddam Hussein has made his presence felt in every corner of Iraq, in every Iraqi home. People here have, you know, a regime of fear in it. So the threat of fear and the threat being in people's minds is enough here to keep people down, to keep mouths closed and tongues silent, to stop people from talking. That's the way it's been up until now. It's hard to imagine that just this morning the people around me were hiding in their homes, afraid and uncertain and not knowing what was going to happen. Now they're here saying they're happy to see the end of Saddam Hussein. They want this symbol of the regime brought down. They've hammered at its base with a sledgehammer, smashing into the concrete. That was not enough for them. They want to see the entire statue crumbling down in ruins around them.
Night has fallen over Baghdad, and there are still crowds of Iraqi people in the square behind me mingling with U.S. Marines. The Marines told me this has brought a brief moment of respite from weeks of hard fighting, but they know the fight is not over yet, and they will be on their guard throughout the night, because that is when resistance, if there is any left, is expected.
Colonel Mitch Mitchell is joining us now. That was Lara Logan, who was there on the scene this morning in Baghdad as the U.S. forces rolled in. Mitch is with us down in Washington. It's been quite a day, hasn't it, Mitch? And we've been watching these pictures together, and it's a scene of really almost inestimable importance, yet at the same time, this war is not over by any stretch of the imagination.
Yes, Harry, it's a great day to celebrate for us, though, because of this psychological victory. Bringing down a statue that epitomizes the regime of Saddam Hussein and saying to the world, the regime is no more, is an important aspect of this campaign, no question about it. However, it is also true that when you take down a regime, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've taken down the military right away. There's a lot of cleanup that has to be done. And it's a good thing we have follow-on forces coming into the theater, because we may have to go back, as Dan and others have mentioned, and refight some of those battles. Little pockets of resistance have to be taken out. And so it may take some time to get that done. I could even see this thing going on for a couple more months before we clean out all the last elements of resistance, before they fade into the ground and then start this next war in Iraq, which of course would be the war of terrorism.
It's so interesting. This is a city of 5 million people. there's no way to know in which nook and cranny and neighborhood Fedayeen, as John Roberts was talking about earlier, these jihadists, there are people there from Syria, from Lebanon, Palestinians who have come there to fight, to give up their lives. This is an enormously dangerous and complicated situation right now. While it's quiet in the heart of downtown Baghdad, no U.S. serviceman is safe on the streets of Baghdad right now.
That's absolutely correct. And you know, one of the things we're counting on is the people who we see out there celebrating right now coming to our assistance and pointing these people out. It's not going to be 100%, but at least we'll get some help that we hadn't had before, because they're no longer repressed in the manner that they had been repressed. You know, we have other challenges too. This is the most difficult time of the entire campaign. Being in Baghdad City, having no government whatever in Baghdad functioning, and having to take care of 5 or 6 million people. It's a major undertaking, and it's going to take a lot of our efforts to feed them, make sure they have water, make sure all the utilities are turned back on as fast as we can get them on. Otherwise, the population very quickly goes from looting to anarchy, and then you've got a real problem on your hands, and you have to be the police force, and that equates to being hated eventually. Wow. You don't want to have that situation. So our military in there right now have not only got a combat role, but they've got a recovery role for the civilian population they have to deal with as well. Humanitarian assistance is critically important at this point.
This is truly a risky business right now. Power has been off for more than a week. Iraqi radio and television has been off for more than 24 hours now. No police force, no control on the ground. U.S. forces have really got their work cut out for them. Mitch Mitchell, thanks very much. David Martin is at the Pentagon, and we're really getting ready here for the daily briefing that happens at the Pentagon, and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is going to have plenty to say, we're sure. And David, some of your thoughts here as we get ready for this briefing.
Well, Harry, let's talk about some of the battles yet to be fought. Right now, there are the lead elements of an armored brigade, a U.S. armored brigade, about 20 miles outside of the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk, which is about 200 miles north of Baghdad. They are waiting for tanks to be brought up. The U.S. has been airlifting tanks in from Germany to the Kurdish-held portion of northern Iraq. They are bringing them up to Kirkuk, which is where the so-called green line is that divides the Kurdish-held part from the part held by the regime of Saddam Hussein. And when they get those tanks up there, they're not very many tanks, probably 20 tanks in all, they're going to begin a move against the Republican Guard and regular Army Iraqi troops that are still holding on to Kirkuk. And then you will see the start of full-fledged conventional ground operations up in the north. And of course, that's not all the people on the Iraqi side have to worry about up north, because the 4th Infantry Division, if you remember, the 4th Infantry Division was the division that was supposed to have opened up the northern front and gone in through Turkey. Turkey said, no, you can't come in through Turkey. So they've gone all the way around and are coming in through Kuwait. In a day or two, they are going to begin pushing off from Kuwait. They will be available either to take the place of troops in Baghdad, to free up troops in Baghdad to go up north to Tikrit and to Kirkuk, or they can simply keep on going themselves up to Crete. So the U.S. is got a lot more forces it's going to pour into these battles, and the only thing that's going to stop these battles from happening is total surrender by the Iraqi forces up there.
Former General Jay Garner is the man who's supposed to be in charge once this is all done. And as we were talking with Mitch Mitchell, what a complicated and terribly dangerous situation in this country now is. U.S. forces are there, and whatever is left of Saddam's regime in Baghdad seems to have crumbled away. But my gosh, this is a very tenuous situation there right now.
Yeah. I first met Jay Garner when he was in charge of coming to the aid of the Kurdish people in northern Iraq after the first Gulf War. and just trying to figure out all the rivalries and hatreds in northern Iraq was about enough to handle. And now, of course, he's responsible for trying to figure that out throughout the entire country. So this is a huge job ahead, and U.S. officials have been fairly frank. The Deputy Secretary of State said in congressional testimony, we don't really know what we're getting into up here in the reconstruction of Iraq, but the U.S. is committed now.
Well, and talk about on the precipice of what could be a humanitarian crisis. The Red Cross completely overwhelmed in Baghdad in the last 24 hours. They actually ceased operations because it was so dangerous there. Hospitals with enormous civilian casualties, without medicine, without staff. There's no electricity there. This is pretty dangerous stuff. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Richard Myers, is about to start their press conference, and we're going to join them live right now.
This is a good day for the Iraqi people. There is no question but that there are difficult and very dangerous days ahead, and that the fighting will continue for some period. But certainly anyone seeing the faces of the liberated Iraqis, the free Iraqis, has to say that this is a very good day. Tomorrow will mark 3 weeks since Operation Iraqi Freedom began, and the progress of the men and women in uniform who make up the coalition forces has been nothing short of spectacular. They drove through the south, up, braving dust storms and death squads to reach Baghdad in record time. They secured Iraq's southern oil fields for the Iraqi people, took out terrorist camps in the north and the south, secured large sections of western Iraq, preventing the regime from attacking its neighbors with Scud missiles. They've liberated cities and towns and are now in the Iraqi capital, removing the regime from its seat of power and center of gravity. As Iraqis see the coalition progress, they are losing their fear of this vicious regime. And I think it's safe to say that the mood in the country is in fact tipping, at least in Baghdad. The scenes of free Iraqis celebrating in the streets, riding American tanks, tearing down the statues of Saddam Hussein in the center of Baghdad are breathtaking. Watching them, one cannot help but think of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Iron Curtain. We're seeing history unfold, events that will shape the course of a country, the fate of a people, and potentially the future of the region. Saddam Hussein is now taking his rightful place alongside Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, Ceausescu in the pantheon of failed, brutal dictators. And the Iraqi people are well on their way to freedom. The general who led our war of liberation, George Washington, once said, "My anxious recollection, my sympathetic feeling, and my best wishes are irresistibly excited whensoever in any country I see an oppressed nation unfurl the banners of freedom." Unquote. As we watch Iraqis unfurl the banners of freedom today, all Americans share in their joy and celebrate with them, particularly those from Michigan that we've seen on television who are seeing their country, their friends, and often their relatives liberated. Let me say a word to the families of those who have given their lives in this war. As you watch these historic scenes unfold, take enormous pride in the service of your loved ones. They made this possible. Their sacrifice is permitting the liberation of a people and the end of a regime that, thanks to them, will never again threaten the world with its weapons. And to those Iraqi people who are not yet free, let me assure you that you will be free. I've seen President Bush almost every day since this conflict began, and I can assure you that he is, like the American people, committed to your freedom and to your future and to seeing this effort through. We will not stop until Saddam Hussein's regime has been removed from every corner of that country. The Iraqi people are understandably elated at the prospect of life without Saddam Hussein. We said from the beginning that he was finished. Now they are daring to believe it. But there is still a great deal of work to do, and many unfinished missions to complete before victory can be declared. Baghdad is in the process of being liberated, although battles continue in and around the city. And the regime has been run out of a number of Iraqi cities and towns. But other Iraqi cities are still being contested, and there will still be tough fighting and difficult tasks ahead. We still must capture, account for, or otherwise deal with Saddam Hussein and his sons and the senior Iraqi leadership. We still must find and ensure the safe return of prisoners of war, those captured in this war as well as any still held from the last Gulf War, Americans and other nationals. We still must secure the northern oil fields, which have probably been wired for destruction, as was the case with the southern fields. We still need to find and secure Iraq's weapons of mass destruction facilities and secure Iraq's borders so we can prevent the flow of weapons of mass destruction materials and senior regime officials out of the country. We still must find out everything we can about how the Iraqi regime acquired its capabilities and the proliferation that took place by countries in the industrialized world. We need to locate Iraqi scientists with knowledge of these programs, and we're asking people to come forward and help in this efforts. Rewards are available to those who help us prevent the disappearance of personnel, documentation, and materials. Good lives and a better future are possible for those who turn themselves in and choose to cooperate with coalition forces. We must also capture or kill the terrorists still operating in Iraq and prevent them from gaining access to weapons of mass destruction. We must locate Ba'ath Party members, records, and weapon caches. We must locate the records of the Iraqi Intelligence Service, the Special Security Organization, the Fedayeen Saddam death squads, and the Special Republican Guards. We must locate the wealth of the Iraqi regime inside of Iraq and outside of the country so it can be returned to the rightful